My name is Ryan. I'm 32 years old, and if you'd asked me a year ago who I trusted more than anyone in the world, my answer would have been immediate. Ethan. No hesitation. We've been friends for almost 15 years. Then there was my girlfriend, Natalie, and my manager, Mark. Those are the only other people you really need to know. Everyone else comes and goes, but the four of us are at the center of everything that happened. I still have a hard time believing this story is real, even though I lived every second of it. Ethan and I met during our freshman year of college. I accidentally took the parking space he'd been waiting for. I expected him to start yelling the second he walked toward my car. Instead, he knocked on my window, smiled, and said, "You owe me a beer." I laughed. That's fair. We grabbed drinks after class, and somehow one beer turned into 3. 3 beers turned into a friendship that lasted nearly 15 years. From that day on, we were practically inseparable. We studied together. Went on road trips every summer. Watched football every Sunday. Helped each other move more times than I can count. When my dad had heart surgery, Ethan stayed with me at the hospital until almost 3 in the morning. When his mother passed away a few years later, I was one of the 6 people who carried her casket. That's the kind of friendship we had. People constantly asked if we were brothers. Eventually we stopped correcting them. It was easier to just smile. By the time I turned 32, life finally felt stable. I worked as an IT systems administrator for a logistics company outside Chicago. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and I'd finally saved enough money to buy my first house. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms. A small backyard. A garage that was a little too small for my truck. But it was mine. The first night I slept there, I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking, I actually did it. After years of renting tiny apartments and worrying about every bill, I finally had a place that felt like home. Ethan was one of the first people to see it. He walked through the front door, looked around, and whistled. Damn. What? You actually became a responsible adult. I laughed. Scary, isn't it? A little. Then he hugged me. I'm proud of you. I believed him. Honestly, why wouldn't I? He'd celebrated every major milestone in my life. At least, that's what I thought. The biggest change came a few months later. Her name was Natalie. I met her at a 4th of July barbecue hosted by one of my coworkers. I almost didn't go. I'd worked late that Friday and seriously considered staying home. Instead, I forced myself to show up. Best decision I ever made. She wasn't trying to be the loudest person at the party. She wasn't standing in the middle of every conversation. The first thing I noticed was that she was laughing at someone who had completely burned a tray of burgers. She caught me looking. What? I've never seen someone ruin food that fast. I was thinking the same thing. She grinned. So we're judging him together? Absolutely. That was our first conversation. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't some magical movie moment. It just felt easy. We talked through dinner. We talked while everyone watched fireworks. By the end of the night, I asked for her number. She smiled. I was wondering how long you'd wait. Our first date lasted almost 6 hours. The restaurant closed before either of us noticed. The waitress finally walked over, laughed, and said, "You two don't have to leave, but we do." A few months later, Natalie had a drawer at my house. Then a toothbrush. Then she started spending more nights with me than at her apartment. My mom adored her. My sister immediately started asking when I was going to propose. Even my coworkers noticed I smiled more. There was only one person she hadn't met yet. Ethan. I couldn't wait to introduce them. The two most important people in my life were finally going to meet. The following Saturday, I invited Ethan over for dinner. Nothing fancy. Burgers. Beer. A baseball game quietly playing in the background. When he walked in, he looked at Natalie and smiled. "So. You're the woman who's been stealing all of Ryan's free time." Natalie laughed. "I prefer to think of it as improving how he spends it. I already like you." Within minutes, they were joking with each other like old friends. Watching them made me genuinely happy. Some people worry their best friend and their partner won't get along. Mine clicked instantly. At one point, Natalie admitted she'd never learned how to change a tire. Ethan looked at me. "You seriously haven't taught her?" I shrugged. "I've never had to." He stood up. "Come on." We all walked into the driveway. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan turned changing a tire into the funniest lesson I'd ever seen. Natalie laughed so hard she almost dropped the lug wrench. By the end of the night she hugged him goodbye and said, "I get why Ryan talks about you all the time." He smiled. "And now I get why he won't stop talking about you." Driving home after dropping Natalie off, I couldn't stop smiling. Life felt complete. I had a career I enjoyed. A house I loved. A woman I could picture spending the rest of my life with. And a best friend who had been beside me through every chapter. If someone had told me that night that one of those people would eventually destroy almost everything I'd built, I would have laughed. Because there wasn't a single reason for me to doubt Ethan. Not then. Not yet. If I had to point to the exact moment things started changing, I couldn't. There wasn't one big event. No dramatic fight. No obvious betrayal. Just 100 little moments that didn't seem connected at the time. That's what made it so dangerous. You don't notice your life coming apart when it happens one loose thread at a time. Over the next few months, Natalie practically lived at my house. She still had her apartment, but she was with me 5 or 6 nights a week. She had her own coffee mug in my kitchen. A shelf in my bathroom. A key hanging next to mine by the front door. One Saturday morning we were drinking coffee on the back patio when she looked at me for a few seconds before speaking. "I've been thinking." "Oh." She laughed. "Nothing bad." "That's good." She set her mug down. "I think we should stop pretending I don't already live here." I smiled. So maybe it's time to make it official." I didn't even have to think about it. I'd love that. For the next hour we talked about everything. Her lease. Where we'd put her desk. Whether the spare bedroom should become an office or a guest room. It all felt normal. Comfortable. The kind of future I'd wanted for years. That evening I called Ethan. "You busy tomorrow?" "Depends. I've got news." "Oh?" "Dinner at my place." He laughed. "You're making burgers again, aren't you?" "You know me too well." The next night, everything seemed exactly the way it always had. Ethan arrived carrying a 6-pack. Natalie rolled her eyes. "Does he ever show up empty-handed?" "Never," I said. "It's against the rules," Ethan added. We ate outside while the sun was going down. At one point I finally said it. "Natalie's moving in." She smiled across the table. Ethan looked at both of us. Then he raised his beer. "Congratulations." We clinked bottles. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. Then he asked, "You sure you're ready?" I looked at him. "Yeah. Big step." "It is." "You've thought it through?" Natalie laughed. "I hope so." He smiled back immediately. "I'm just messing with you." The conversation moved on. I forgot about it almost instantly. Looking back, though, it was the first time I'd ever heard even the smallest hint of hesitation in his voice when something good happened to me. A couple of weeks later, work got strange. Not terrible. Just strange. One Monday morning, Mark stopped by my desk. "You send a client report Friday night?" "No." He frowned. "The system says you did. It has to be a mistake." I hadn't even been in the office Friday night. Natalie and I had gone to a movie. Mark wasn't accusing me of anything. He just looked confused. "Come see me after lunch." The IT department spent 2 hours checking the logs. According to the system, someone had remotely accessed my workstation after business hours. The report had been sent using my account. The strange part? The login happened while I was sitting in a movie theater. Eventually, the issue was written off as a possible security breach. My passwords were changed. The case was closed. Before I left his office, Mark said, "I know it wasn't you. I appreciate that. But be careful." "Why?" "If it happened once, it can happen again." That night I told Ethan about it. We were watching football in my living room. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he shook his head. "That's messed up. Tell me about it. You could have lost your job." "I know." He took a sip of his beer. "At least Mark trusts you." "Yeah. You've always been lucky with managers." I shrugged. "I guess." He leaned back on the couch. "You know." "What?" "If I were you, I'd start paying attention to who's around you." "What do you mean?" "I don't know." He looked thoughtful. "Sometimes people get jealous." I laughed. "Jealous of what?" He gestured around the room. "You've got a house. A good job. A girlfriend. Life's going pretty well." I smiled. "I've worked hard for it." "I know." His answer came quickly. Almost too quickly. Then he changed the subject. I didn't think about it again. A month passed. Nothing major happened. Then one Friday morning, I walked outside to leave for work. My truck's driver's side window was shattered. Glass covered the driveway. I immediately looked inside. My backpack was still there. My laptop. My sunglasses. Even the cash I'd left in the center console. Nothing had been stolen. Someone had broken the window. And simply walked away. The responding officer looked around for a few minutes. Probably teenagers. For no reason. He shrugged. "It happens." Insurance covered the damage, but it still bothered me. Why smash a window and take nothing? That afternoon, Ethan stopped by after work. He crouched beside the truck. "Damn." "Yeah. You sure nothing's missing?" "I checked 3 times." He stood up. "That's weird." "I know. If someone wanted to rob you, they would have taken the laptop." "Exactly." He looked around the neighborhood before quietly saying, "I've got a bad feeling." I laughed. "About what?" "I don't know." He shoved his hands into his pockets. "It just feels like someone keeps messing with you." I looked at the broken glass. I can't think of anyone who would. Neither could he. Or at least, that's what I believed. A few nights later, Natalie asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Can I ask you a weird question?" "Sure." She hesitated. "Has Ethan always been protective?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He asked me something the other day." "What?" She looked uncomfortable. "He asked if you've ever had a problem with jealousy." I actually laughed. "What?" I thought he was joking. He wasn't. What did you tell him? I said you've never given me a reason to think that. I shook my head. That's a strange question. I thought so too. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe he's just looking out for me. Maybe. She smiled. But it wasn't a very convincing smile. The conversation ended there. At the time, I dismissed it. Friends ask weird questions sometimes. That didn't make Ethan a bad person. At least. That's what I kept telling myself. For the next couple of weeks, life settled down again. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. Nothing dramatic happened. No broken windows. No strange emails. No mysterious phone calls. Just enough peace to convince me everything had been a coincidence. Looking back, I think that's exactly what made the next part work so well. Whoever was behind all of it knew when to stop. Just long enough for me to lower my guard. One Friday evening, Natalie and I were making dinner when my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. You home? I replied. Yeah. Why? Just dropping something off. 10 minutes later, he pulled into the driveway carrying a toolbox. I finally found your socket wrench. I'd forgotten I'd lent it to him months earlier. You drove 20 minutes just to return this? He shrugged. I was in the area. Natalie laughed. You're either the nicest person I've ever met, or the worst liar. Ethan grinned. I'll let you decide. We invited him in. He stayed for about an hour. We talked about football, work, and vacation plans before he headed home. Everything felt normal. Completely normal. The following Monday, Mark stopped by my desk again. You free for a minute? I followed him into his office. He closed the door. I've been reviewing something. I immediately felt my stomach tighten. My account again? No. He turned his monitor toward me. I've been comparing security logs. So? There are more remote login attempts. I stared at the screen. They failed this time. Because of the password change? He nodded. Exactly. I looked closer. Every attempt happened late at night. Every attempt happened while I wasn't home. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Whoever it was knew my schedule. Not just my work schedule. My personal one. Mark leaned back. I'm not trying to scare you. But someone knows your routine. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who actually knew where I was most evenings? My parents? Sometimes. Natalie? Obviously. Ethan? Almost always. The thought crossed my mind for less than a second before I pushed it away. No. Not Ethan. That was ridiculous. A few days later, Natalie came home looking unusually quiet. You okay? She nodded. Just tired. I could tell she wanted to say something. After dinner, she finally did. I ran into Ethan today. Oh? He was getting coffee downtown. Did you guys talk? For a few minutes. I smiled. That's nice. She hesitated. Ryan. What? He asked another strange question. I sighed. What was it this time? He asked if we ever argued about money. I frowned. Money? I told him no. And then? He said that's good because financial problems usually destroy relationships. I laughed awkwardly. That's random. That's what I thought. She looked at me carefully. Has he said anything strange to you about me? The question caught me off guard. No. She nodded slowly. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Probably. But as soon as I said it, I realized I wasn't completely convinced. It was the third odd conversation she'd told me about. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they felt deliberate. Not enough to accuse anyone. Just enough to make me uncomfortable. For the first time in 15 years. I found myself wondering why Ethan kept asking questions that could only make us doubt each other. And for the first time, I didn't have a good answer. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking everything. 15 years of friendship doesn't disappear because of a few awkward conversations. That's what I kept repeating to myself. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. Not enough to accuse anyone. Just enough to make me pay closer attention. The next week, Mark stopped me as I was leaving work. Got a minute? Sure. He closed the door to his office. I wasn't planning to tell you this. My stomach tightened. What happened? I found 2 more remote login attempts. From my account? No. He shook his head. They were trying to get into your workstation again. Were they successful? No. I let out a breath. The password changes worked. Then what's the problem? He looked me straight in the eyes. The timing. He turned his monitor toward me. The attempts happened late at night. One while I was having dinner at my parents' house. The other while Natalie and I were at a concert. I frowned. That's weird. Mark nodded. Whoever this is knows exactly when you're away from home. I didn't answer. Because he was right. That wasn't luck anymore. Someone knew my routine. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I started writing everything down. The fake email. The broken truck window. The conversations Natalie had mentioned. The failed login attempts. Every strange thing that had happened over the past few months. Separately. None of it meant anything. Together. It looked like someone was slowly pushing my life off balance. I just couldn't understand why. A few days later, Natalie came over after work. She noticed the notebook immediately. You've been thinking about this a lot. I can't stop. She flipped through a few pages before looking at me. I remembered something. What? The second time I met Ethan. I looked up. You were inside grabbing drinks. I nodded. He asked me if you ever checked my phone. I stared at her. What? I laughed because I thought he was joking. And? He didn't laugh. A knot formed in my stomach. What exactly did he say? She thought for a second. He said, Ryan's a great guy. He just gets insecure sometimes. Don't let him make you feel guilty for having male friends. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've never even asked to look at your phone. I know. I've never cared who you're friends with. I know. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I didn't believe him. But it was strange. Very strange. And suddenly another memory came back to me. A month earlier, Ethan had casually mentioned that Natalie seemed really interested in how much money I made. At the time I'd laughed it off. Now I realized something. He'd been telling each of us small things about the other. Nothing serious. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make us question each other without starting an argument. It was subtle. Almost invisible. 3 days later, I came home from work and found my mailbox hanging open. Letters were scattered across the driveway. One envelope had blown halfway into the street. I looked around. Nobody. No broken locks. Nothing stolen. Just another pointless inconvenience. As I picked everything up, my neighbor, Mr. Wilson, walked over. Kids again? I looked at him. What do you mean? I've seen a truck parked outside your house a couple of times late at night. What kind of truck? Dark gray pickup. My heart skipped. There had to be hundreds of gray pickups in town. It couldn't mean anything. Right? Mr. Wilson pointed toward the corner of his garage. My cameras probably caught it. I froze. You have cameras facing the street? He nodded. Mostly for my driveway. But part of yours is visible too. For the first time in weeks. I felt like I might finally get an answer. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in his living room. He pulled up the recording from the previous night. The street was empty. Then a pickup slowly entered the frame. It stopped directly in front of my house. The headlights turned off. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. The porch light wasn't bright enough to see his face. But I didn't need to. I recognized the truck long before I recognized the man. And in that moment, my heart sank. I didn't want to believe it. Even after recognizing the truck, I kept hoping I was wrong. Maybe Ethan had forgotten something at my house. Maybe he'd come to leave me a note. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Mr. Wilson pressed play. The man walked straight to my mailbox. He looked up and down the street. Opened it. Pulled every letter out. Then calmly scattered them across my driveway before getting back into his truck and driving away. Neither of us spoke. Mr. Wilson finally looked at me. You know him? I nodded. Yeah. I thanked him for the footage, copied it onto a flash drive, and drove home in complete silence. I must have watched that 30-second clip 20 times that night. Every time I hoped I'd notice something different. I never did. I called Natalie. Can you come over? The moment she walked in, she knew something was wrong. Without saying a word, I handed her the laptop. She watched the footage once. Then again. When it ended, she covered her mouth. Oh my God. I know. What are you going to do? I looked at the frozen image of Ethan's truck. I'm going to ask him. The next evening I texted him. Me, game tonight? Ethan, wouldn't miss it. An hour later he walked through my front door carrying a six-pack, smiling exactly like he always did. You look exhausted, he said. Long week? You could say that. We watched football for almost 40 minutes. Neither of us paid much attention to the game. At halftime, I muted the TV. I want to show you something. He looked over. I slid the laptop across the coffee table and hit play. The smile disappeared from his face the second his truck appeared on the screen. When the video ended, he didn't move. He just stared at the black screen. Finally, he asked. Where did you get this? My neighbor's security camera. Silence. So. I said quietly. Want to explain why you were outside my house at midnight? He didn't answer. I asked another question. My truck. Silence. My work computer. Nothing. The things you told Natalie. Still nothing. Then he let out a long breath. I didn't think you'd ever find out. Those 7 words hurt more than I can describe. Because they weren't a denial. They were a confession. Why? It was the only question I had left. He looked down at the floor. You changed. I grew up. You stopped needing me. I frowned. What does that even mean? He laughed bitterly. You used to call me for everything. When your car broke down. When your ex dumped you. When you couldn't pay rent. I mattered. He looked around my living room. Then you got the promotion. You bought this house. You met Natalie. You had your own life. And me? He shrugged. I became the guy you invited over once a week. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you created problems. Just so I'd need your help? I never wanted to ruin your life. But you did. You broke into my house. I copied your garage remote years ago. You sabotaged my job. I knew you wouldn't actually get fired. You lied to Natalie. I just wanted to protect what we had. I stared at him. No. I said quietly. You wanted control. For the first time since I'd known him. He had nothing to say. I stood up. There's one thing I need to ask. He looked at me. When was the last time you were actually my friend? He didn't answer. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Finally, he whispered. I don't know. That was the moment I realized I'd already lost him long before this conversation. Maybe years before. Maybe the version of Ethan I remembered had only ever existed in my head. I walked to the front door and opened it. You need to leave. He slowly stood up. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. He walked past me, stepped outside, and never looked back. That was the last time I ever saw him. The police reopened the investigation after I gave them the footage. Combined with the evidence from my employer, they were able to prove Ethan had illegally entered my property and repeatedly attempted to access my home network. They couldn't connect him to every incident. But they had enough. He accepted a plea deal instead of going to trial. I never attended the hearing. There was nothing left to hear. A few months later, Natalie officially moved in. The following year, I proposed. She said yes. Life eventually became quiet again. Sometimes people ask if I miss Ethan. The truth is, I miss the person I thought he was. The friend who stayed with me in the hospital. The friend who celebrated every success. The friend I trusted like a brother. But that man never really existed. The real Ethan wasn't the one who saved me whenever life fell apart. He was the reason it fell apart in the first place. And that's the hardest lesson I've ever had to learn.